All right, guys, let's talk some Star Wars. Welcome to MythMachine. Today, we're going to talk about the sequel trilogy and what Lucasfilm could do right now to improve the story and continue to give us more adventures in that era. Buckle up, people. This one's going to get a little crazy. Let's do it. The Star Wars saga, without a doubt, is some of my favorite modern storytelling. There are a lot of people who would argue that it is the definition of a modern myth. But even though I'm a huge fan, I'm also not blind. I understand that Star Wars is not without its flaws, as is any piece of art. Art is subjective, so films, stories, music, it doesn't really matter what it is. Not everybody's gonna like it, and not everyone's gonna have the same opinion. And that's okay. Can you imagine if everyone loved country music? We'd miss out on all these other awesome genres, right? It's the same thing with Star Wars. Because there are so many varying opinions from all these different types of fans, we keep getting more and more diverse content. And I, for one, think that's a great thing. It's no secret that the sequel trilogy was extremely divisive among fans. A lot of people really loved it, a lot of people really hated it, and there's a lot of people that are more in the middle.
I'm the one in the middle, the Bendu.
And that's because it has a lot of really good and also some pretty bad in it. That's kind of just Star Wars. You've got epic stories, great space battles, great action, amazing characters, but you've also got some cheese in there, right? And there's a lot of times that you just really have to suspend your disbelief. But that's what makes it so great. That's what makes it what it is. And even though there's a million different opinions about the sequel trilogy, we can't go back in a time machine and change what we got. The fact of the matter is, those movies were made, and love them or hate them, that's what we've got. And people always love to be armchair critics. They're always bringing up the problems, but one of my biggest pet peeves in life is just when people bring up problems, valid or not, but they don't come with solutions. So today, in looking at some of the weak points of the sequel trilogy, we're also going to be talking mainly about a very practical solution that would do three things. First, it would give fans who enjoyed the sequel trilogy another chance to go on another adventure with those characters that they loved during that timeline. Second, it would smooth out, set up, and improve some of the weaker parts of the story while also giving answers to questions that were left unanswered, which would also hopefully help some of those fans that weren't overly enthusiastic about the sequel trilogy get a little bit more on board, to feel like they're being heard and understand that yes, some of those criticisms are very, very valid. And the third thing this solution would do is not cost the studio a whole bunch of time, money, and resources to make. Because let's just be real for a minute here. It doesn't make any real business sense for them to just wipe the slate clean, take out all the sequels, and basically throw away this $4 billion investment that they've been working on for the past 8 to 10 years. There are so many talented people who have put their heart and souls into these projects, and so many fans that love them as well. We don't want to take that away from them, but there's definitely room for improvement. So here's what I think Lucasfilm could do to improve the sequel trilogy without reshooting or erasing anything that they've already done. I think that they should release at least one full-length novel that takes place in the time gap between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. Hear me out. The Star Wars story is extremely media agnostic. What do I mean by that? I mean, there's the movies, there's the books, there's comics, there's games, there's a slew of different forms of content that are telling this one grand story. And it's all canon. The movies may have more viewers and a bigger audience, but it doesn't necessarily trump the things that happen in the books as well. It's the culmination of all these little bits of storytelling that come together to make the whole Star Wars saga. So why a book, you might be asking yourself? Well, in a book, you can really get into the heads of the characters more. You can flesh them out. You can set things up that are going to be paid off later. You just really have a lot more padding and time to really dig in to the story and the characters. Whereas The Rise of Skywalker, and I would even venture to say all of the sequel trilogy, just feels very rushed. That timeline is very condensed. You can tell that they were trying to, especially in The Rise of Skywalker, fit in so much story within that, 2.5 hour time frame. And that's okay, but you can do so much more in a book. The Revenge of the Sith novelization is a great example of this. Whether you love or hate Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, there's no denying that the novelization really dug into the transformation of Anakin Skywalker into Darth Vader. And it's just because the storytelling format in a book lends itself to being able to get into the psyche, into the head of these characters more than you can just seeing things on screen. Plus, have you ever listened to a Star Wars audiobook? They are such a great production. There's sound effects, there's music. They usually get incredible voice actors who can impersonate all of the characters from Star Wars super, super well. If you haven't, I would highly recommend checking out really any Star Wars audiobook. So for the sequel trilogy, here are a few things that I think a novel like this could really tighten up, improve, and fix. Let's talk about the banta in the room. Emperor Palpatine. He kind of just shows up, and it's right in the opening crawl. In a novel set before this film, we could set him up a lot more. After Kylo killed Snoke, we could now see that he's still hearing these voices inside his head, and it just confuses him because he thought that killing Snoke would get rid of that. But no, he's still feeling this pull to the dark side. He's still feeling manipulated and guided by some force that he doesn't know. And we could start to plant little hints and breadcrumbs that would lead to the reveal of Palpatine. You could have Supreme Leader Kylo Ren going through Snoke's old things. Maybe he comes across some artifacts or some journals, and he realizes that Snoke was actually serving his own master. So Kylo could go on this really cool kind of dark Indiana Jones type quest to discover who this mysterious master is and once and for all rid himself of the voices that have been in his head since he was an infant. Now that he's the Supreme Leader, it's time to finally take control of his own destiny. And in this Indiana Jones-esque quest to find Snoke's master, who we all know is Palpatine, we would also learn more about Snoke and his origins, and that he came from Exegol. Kylo could also discover that Snoke knew of all these old Imperial caches of weaponry and ships that were buried beneath the ground on these different planets, basically setting up and planting the idea that, hey, there could be this secret fleet out on Exegol buried beneath the planet's surface. And this would let us know that this was all part of Snoke's master's plan from the very beginning. We'd also get to see Kylo Ren being the Supreme Leader and probably not being very good at it. He'd be more obsessed with this quest and want to follow that and kind of shirk his duties as Supreme Leader, pushing them off on Hux as he goes on this quest. Hux would obviously be thrilled to be in command, and Kylo would go off to search for Snoke's master, and Hux would be tasked with rebuilding the First Order and seeking out that hidden Imperial weapons cache. Because the First Order was really weak after The Last Jedi. I mean, they just had Starkiller Base destroyed, basically an entire fleet wiped out by the Holdo maneuver, but the Resistance is also weak. And it's almost this race, right? We're cutting between the Resistance, we're cutting between the First Order, and they're both in this race to try and rebuild faster than the other one. The Resistance is trying to find new allies, and it would be really cool to send Rey, Finn, Poe, Rose, Chewie, BB-8, and R2, yes, we need way more R2 in this, out on a mission together to try and get this message of hope that Leia has put together out to the galaxy. Maybe the message is that Jedi Master Luke just returned and took on the whole First Order single-handedly. You could bring in some of the cool elements of Colin Trevorrow's original script for Episode 9 that weren't used. Like maybe you could find out that Hux and the First Order have blocked all outgoing communications and transmissions from the planets in the galaxy. And so the Resistance can't get this message of hope out to potential allies in the galaxy. But Rey is still studying the sacred Jedi text that she got in The Last Jedi. And in doing so, she could discover that there's actually this ancient beacon inside the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. A beacon that is made from such old technology that the First Order can't stop it. They can't stop the transmission if someone were to get to it. You could have the beacon be like this really cool old tech from the Old Republic era. So the Resistance decides, hey, we need to go to this beacon because we need to get this message of hope and of Luke Skywalker out to the galaxy so that everyone knows that now is the time for the rest of the galaxy to rise up against the First Order. So our heroes would go on this adventure to sneak onto First Order occupied Coruscant, and we could really flesh out the team dynamic. We didn't really get a ton of them all together as a team in any of the movies, really. I know The Rise of Skywalker tried to do that, but we didn't get a ton of it. Just the banter back and forth between all of them is really great. So I'd like to see more of that. And we could really give a lot more weight to the character development of Poe, Rose, and especially Finn. Because the character of Finn had so much potential. He started out really great in The Force Awakens, but then he got kind of pushed into more of a supporting role in the later movies. There were a few things set up with his character that never really paid off, and I think it would make his character even stronger by the end of the trilogy if in this novel we paid those things off a bit more. So in this book, we would have more subtle hints to his connection to the Force. We'd see kind of the first times that he's starting to actually feel the Force really guiding him, but he doesn't quite know what it is yet.
That's not how the Force works.
It would be really cool if maybe while they're sneaking through the streets of Coruscant trying to get to the Jedi Temple, they get chased by some First Order troops and they come to a locked door, blaster fires going everywhere, everyone's kind of freaking out. Finn is just jamming on the control panel, but nothing's working. He's trying to do everything he can to get it open, but it just won't budge. Everyone's about to die, and then suddenly Finn calms his mind, shuts it all out, presses the button again that he already has tried so many times, but this time it clicks. And the door slides open, the team runs through. Finn is shocked and confused at what happened, and he clearly knows that it's this power, something that's greater coming from within, but they're all being shot at, so they just have to go. There's no time for him to even stop and think about it. It would also be really great to get a little bit more foreshadowing to Rey's dark side. So maybe something happens like a stormtrooper knocks her staff out of her hand, she's weaponless, and she ends up just, reacting and force choking the stormtrooper, but she stops herself. But she realizes there's this other darker side of me, and it's not something that's as drastic as the Force lightning from The Rise of Skywalker, but it is a little precursor, just a little tease. And Rey still hasn't rebuilt the Skywalker lightsaber. She's using her staff. We're getting some really great staff action in this, but she's still trying to figure out what her place is in this whole story after the revelation from Kylo Ren in The Last Jedi. And it would be really great to see what her Force connection to Kylo is like during this time period. It could be interesting to play with the idea that this connection is still open, it's still there, they both still feel it, but they're kind of ignoring it. It's almost like when you're in a relationship and you get in a fight and you're both mad, but you both love each other, you want to text each other and say, hey, but you're too stubborn, you keep your distance, but there's still that kind of longing there. And this would also set up the kiss that we kind of randomly get in The Rise of Skywalker, so that we see more of that tension there and that there is that care between the two of them. It doesn't need to be anything explicit, but just subtle hints to it. It would just be nice to actually get into each of their heads and see how they actually feel about each other. Meanwhile, Kylo Ren's still on his crazy quest, his little adventure, trying to track down the clues and the hints that Snoke left, basically following the trail of Snoke, trying to find out the origins of Snoke and trying to find out who his mysterious master was. Force Ghost Luke could make a few appearances at key moments. It would be really great if he was kind of haunting Kylo. At the end of The Last Jedi, Luke said to Kylo, "See you around, kid," and he never saw him around, so let's fix that. And I think it would actually be pretty interesting if Luke was actually trying to help Kylo on this quest. If he ultimately wanted Kylo to find happiness, and maybe he knows that this path that he is on will ultimately lead him back to the light side. So Luke could actually be helping him. He could bring up key bits of information from Kylo's past and maybe things from his training when he was Bensolo, things that would be relevant and helpful to the current stage of the quest. And you could do some really cool things here. Like, I would love to get a memory or a flashback at some point of Jedi Master Luke Skywalker and his apprentice Bensolo being called on a mission to Bespin to help out Lando. And it could literally be any task or mission that Lando needs help with. It really doesn't matter here, because what really would be important in this flashback or memory would be that while there, Bensolo would feel this strong pull to something. He doesn't know what it is, but he keeps getting pulled in that direction. And he finds that the thing that's calling him is calling him to the depths and tunnels of Cloud City. He could disobey Luke's directions to carry out his duties and be a little bit rebellious and go and start following the call. So young Ben would be crawling through the dirty tunnels, and he could come across the old Skywalker saber that once belonged to his grandfather. And he'd reach out for the saber and grab it. And just like Rey in The Force Awakens, we would get all of these random flashes, all of these memories that the saber has seen. But this time, we could get flashes of the heroic Anakin Skywalker, and this is where Ben could get his obsession in following his grandfather's footsteps. It could start out as a noble thing. He sees who Anakin Skywalker was, this great hero of the Republic, and want to emulate him. Luke could then see later on that Ben is obsessed with this saber and that he keeps it on his side at all times. He's constantly, trying to get more visions from it. And Luke could see that as kind of a bad thing, kind of an addiction. And so Luke could take it away, and maybe he gives it to Maz for safekeeping, to keep it away from Ben, because he thinks that that's what's best for Ben. He just has his best interests at heart. No matter what happened here, it would be so great to just get some answers to where did the Skywalker saber go? How did we get that into the story again?
A good question for another time.
Yeah, none of that. It would also explain why Kylo said,
That lightsaber, it belongs to me.
in The Force Awakens, and why it seemed like such a good fit for him in The Rise of Skywalker. We would basically find out that it called to Rey, but also it called to Ben before her. It called to the dyad. It would also give him more reason to have even more resentment towards Luke, that he feels that Luke is holding him back, just like Anakin felt that Obi-Wan was holding him back. It's poetry, it rhymes. So Force Ghost Luke would be there trying to help out Kylo on this quest, but Kylo, being Kylo, would keep pushing back. He still hates his uncle and would constantly be trying to push him out. Maybe Kylo's fighting a group of guards at some point. Luke is trying to give him instruction and tell him to look out, but just out of spite, Kylo doesn't listen to him, and he ends up getting his arm chopped off. Because how on earth did we not have a Skywalker get their hand chopped off in the most recent trilogy? Guys, that's low-hanging fruit. That's a fundamental, let's fix that. So Kylo would still manage to win the fight, but at the end, he's wounded, he's armless, and he could end up just begging Luke to leave him alone. And Luke, just wanting what's best for Kylo, would honor his wish. But while leaving, we could also see Luke basically make amends with his nephew. I never felt that we got a really good resolution or closure to the Luke and Ben relationship, and we could really do something here to kind of just fix that. And while this is all going on, Hux could now be on Navarro, where he's tracked one of the hidden weapons caches. And this could be pretty cool because you could tie it into the Mandalorian and add to the connections of the Empire's secret experiments that we saw happening there. And when Hux gets there, he finds that the cache has already been dug up, and that's when suddenly this Imperial fleet jumps in from hyperspace completely out of nowhere and just surrounds his entire fleet. And this is how we introduce General Pryde, because let's face it, he just kind of popped up in The Rise of Skywalker. And it would be really great to see him and Hux just butting heads from the start. We could find out that he's had knowledge of this cache for years and he's been commanding its forces. And maybe he's also been looking for the other caches, but each one that he's found has already been destroyed by the Republic. And it would be really cool to get subtle hints that he's serving someone else from the old Empire, but it's left a mystery. So that when the Emperor randomly starts talking to him on a hologram, it's no longer random. We've kind of set it up. That's what it's all about. It's about plantings and payoffs. And there's a lot of payoffs in The Rise of Skywalker that we just need to plant a little bit earlier. So there's all these hints to this other guy that he's serving, this other organization. Maybe it's the Sith Eternal and we're kind of planting them right now. But Hux doesn't trust him one bit. Now, Rey and the gang infiltrate the old Jedi temple that's since been abandoned and put on lockdown. There could be foliage and plants all over the place, maybe some dangerous creatures living in there. Like, Star Wars is always great when you've got some new alien creatures coming around. They sneak inside and Rey consults R2, who's got the schematics of the Jedi beacon that they're looking for scanned and stored inside him. So R2 is essential. He's kind of leading the way. And they end up finding out that the beacon is deep within the catacombs and that there's a structure underneath the Jedi temple that it's in. And when they get to the entrance of the catacombs, there could be all of these First Order stormtroopers and this kind of archaeological excavation site at this big door, this big entrance with all these like Sith runes on it. And this is where we could introduce Beaumont Kim, you know, the guy who played Merry in The Lord of the Rings, who was in The Rise of Skywalker for like 2 seconds. I mean, we know that Beaumont had all this knowledge about the Sith. He said those lines in The Rise of Skywalker.
Secrets only the Sith knew.
And so here we would find that he's an archaeologist who studies ancient Jedi runes as well as Sith artifacts. And the First Order is kind of forcing him to do this for them. We'd also introduce Claude here because he just showed up in the Falcon. Let's figure out how he got there. So Claude in this story would be Beaumont's assistant, but they'd both be working for the First Order against their will. Anyway, maybe a stormtrooper sees one of the gang and all of a sudden a battle breaks out. Poe gets knocked down. Maybe he's about to die, but Finn jumps in between everyone. He puts his hands out and he yells and everyone just stops because one of the First Order commanding officers there recognizes Finn. FN2187. Finn begins to talk and he gives just this riveting speech and he's able to get the stormtroopers to stand down. And one by one, they put down their weapons, they take off their helmets as they realize that they're fighting for a cause that they never signed up for. They've been trained to do it since birth, but other than that, they have no reason to be in this fight. They see in Finn that they can choose their own lives and make their own destiny. So Finn cuts a deal with the stormtroopers just leave, but as they're leaving, one of them stops and thanks Finn, and he lets them know, hey, if you ever need a home, you'll find one in the Resistance. And he wishes them luck in making a future of their own. So Beaumont and Claude are freed now, and Rey and the group kind of convince them to help them on their journey, but Beaumont says they shouldn't continue forward and that the structure underneath the temple is actually a Sith temple. But they tell him about their cause. They tell him that they're trying to send this message of hope out to the galaxy to kind of rally allies to the cause. And Claude is able to convince his friend Beaumont that they should help them. So Beaumont, with his knowledge, is able to crack the code of the door. They open it up and they go inside. They have no idea where they're going at this point. They know what the beacon looks like and kind of how to make it function, but they don't know the path forward. But Rey feels herself being pulled deeper and deeper into the Sith temple, and she's kind of guiding the way now. It might be cool if along the way or some point in the story, she finds a broken lightsaber and she finds a yellow or gold kyber crystal. I mean, it doesn't really matter how it happens. It would just be really cool to find out where Rey got the crystal that would make her yellow saber later on. Back over to Kylo, he'd be wounded and he'd find that the next part of his quest would require help. And so he goes to get his knights, the Knights of Ren. Now, the Knights of Ren, we all know they were set up to be these super cool guys, but we really never got much of them. They never even really said a word. So we could see him going and asking for their help. Maybe he abandoned them for the First Order and he has to kind of convince them and win back their trust. But we'd find out where they've been and what they've been doing for the last 2 movies, and they'd help repair his hand, much like Luke's in The Empire Strikes Back. They agree to help Kylo, they go with him on his quest, but the last part of his quest could lead him and his knights to have this huge climactic battle against a large army, which would be super cool because we know that the Knights of Ren are all kind of force sensitive. So it'd be great to kind of see that happening, to read about that. They defeat this army, and the army has been protecting this Sith holocron in a Sith temple. So Kylo would get the holocron, he would open it up, it would start speaking to him, and maybe he finds out that, I don't know, Snoke's master lives on Exegol, and that's where Snoke is from, in the unknown regions. And I'd also want at some point for Kylo to learn about the dyad, or at least hear the term. It doesn't have to be here with the holocron, but just so that even if we don't really dig into it here, it sets it up so that when he says to Rey, hey, we're a dyad, it didn't just come out of nowhere. We know that he's been studying about it and learning more between that time period. Maybe it comes up naturally that there are dyads in the Force, and he learns that the Sith were trying to be a dyad. That's why they had the rule of two, a master and an apprentice, to be the physical manifestation of kind of a synthetic or an artificial dyad. Maybe you find out that they only ever have 2 Sith temples, and the Sith temple that Kylo's at is representative of the dyad, or the other part of the Sith temple that Rey is at the exact same time on Coruscant. And so you would find out that the real dyad of Kylo and Rey, who are basically ignoring each other, doing everything they can to distance themselves from their connection, are still being drawn to the same things at the same time. We just need some more dyad explanation. So from the holocron, Kylo learns that Snoke is from Exegol, and that's where his master would be. But he also learns that in order to get to Exegol, he's gonna need the Wayfinder to navigate. And he learns that it's safeguarded in a vault outside of none other than his own grandfather's castle on Mustafar. He feels strongly that everything in his life has led him up to this moment, and he knows now with this deep family connection that he is on the right path. At the same time, Rey in the other Sith temple has now found the beacon, and R2's able to activate it and send out the message that he has stored from Leia inside. The message breaks through the First Order's barrier, and we see that it's gone out to all star systems and all planets. And we see that the legend of Luke Skywalker is now permeating everyone's news feeds despite the First Order's propaganda. Hux is notified of it, and he and Pride have to stop their standoff to rush their fleets to Coruscant to try and cut the message off. Meanwhile, the message from the holocron that Kylo and the Knights of Ren have found is starting to wrap up its message, but then the voice suddenly starts speaking in an ancient Sith language. It's a coded message, and the beacon from Kylo's temple suddenly shoots that message out across the galaxy, sending it to the temple on Coruscant, almost as if it's a response to the message of hope that the temple on Coruscant just sent out. So the message of hope gets cut off by the new incoming message from Kylo's temple, only it's coming in scrambled. It's in that ancient Sith language, right? So nobody understands it. But suddenly Beaumont perks up and says he can decipher and translate it. But just as he begins, Pride and Hux's fleets both show up, and they intercept the message, cutting it off to the temple. Pride and Hux's troops both storm the temple, but just as Rey and the gang are about to be captured, the stormtroopers that Finn talked to earlier come in and save the day. They rescue them, and they're able to help them escape to the Falcon. Before they say goodbye, they basically tell Finn that they're going to start helping spread the message of hope, in hopes that it'll bring change to them as well, that they will want to put down their weapons of war and start fighting and working for peace. Kylo meets back up with Hux and is introduced to Pride. Pride pledges allegiance to Kylo because he's more or less a Sith, and Kylo accepts Pride's fleet. But the First Order still isn't strong enough to finally snuff out any and all resistance. But Pride tells Kylo that he has something that might help, and he presents the message that he has now decoded to Kylo. Now that Pride's proven his allegiance, Kylo puts him in charge as Allegiant General Pride, and Hux is obviously upset. And this now sets up Hux for being the spy in The Rise of Skywalker. We now know that he has even more motivation to leak the message that was used against him, that was used to take him out of his position of power. In his quarters, Kylo would listen to the decoded message from Exegol, and he would be shocked to find that it's from the Emperor. Everything in this story needs to lead to Exegol so that it's not just thrown in The Rise of Skywalker. It needs to be set up so that we don't necessarily see all these things coming, but that they're inevitable to us. When they do happen, we're like, oh yeah, there's no other way this could have happened. It needs to feel like there was some sort of plan. So now at the end of the novel, Kylo is headed to Mustafar to finish what his grandfather started once and for all, by wiping out any remaining existence of the Emperor and taking the throne as the most powerful dark side user or Sith. Rey and company regroup with the Resistance, and they basically tell them about the message that they weren't able to get in time and decode. And Leia decides that that is the Resistance's next mission, that they need to find that message because it could affect the fate of the entire galaxy. If they can just get a hold of the message, Beaumont can then decode it. Leia could also now take on the mentor role to Rey, and she could basically tell her that it's time to complete her training, to help her learn to commune with the Jedi of the past, and to basically prepare her for what's to come. And Rey would officially accept Leia as her master, and she would begin to rebuild the Skywalker saber. Now, I know these ideas aren't perfect, but I really do feel that a story set between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker could fill in a lot of the gaps and really flesh out all of these elements. We could build up to things that are paid off in the final installment, so much more, so that when we get to those, they just have way more of an impact and they make sense. And really, there are a million ways you could do this. It doesn't even have to be in a novel. That's just my idea. Even if it was a novel, there's a million different ways you could tell that story, but you could do so many cool things with it. You could even tie it into other stories and spin-offs. Like, I think it would be so cool to have a Luke Skywalker and Bensolo adventure series where it's basically filling in the gaps between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. If you love the sequel trilogy, that is great, but it's not without its flaws. And there's also a lot of good within it. I think it would be fantastic if in the future we could keep improving it, but that's just one idea. If you could tell other stories in the sequel era, what would you want to learn more about? What questions do you still have that you would want answers to? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and subscribing. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see you around.